Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Gaming here, back in another video. Today's episode, we'll be taking a look at how to play Unholy Death Knight in Season 3 of The War Within. This is going to be a Mythic Plus beginner's guide, so this is not going to be for any sort of advanced Unholy DK players. Unholy DK is a specialization that has a potent toolkit that combines strong defensive options, unique crowd control, and some of the most explosive burst windows in the game. However, it is held back by its relatively long setup times and niche utility compared to other melee DPS specs. In short dungeons or lower level keys where mobs die quickly, Unholy can struggle to fully ramp its damage potential, as its burst relies heavily on building festering wounds, spreading virulent plague, and synchronizing multiple cooldowns. Conversely, in high keys, where pools are large and enemies live long enough, the Death Knight's ramping damage tends to shine, and Unholy becomes a powerhouse of sustained and burst AoE. This makes this a strong specialization, best suited for players who enjoy careful planning, timing, and control. Unholy's biggest strength comes from its incredible burst AoE potential, exceptional survivability, and powerful enemy control. When all cooldowns are aligned, such as Army of the Dead, Apocalypse, Unholy Assault, and Death and Decay, Unholy can unleash a devastating form of AoE damage that few specs can match. Its burst windows are further amplified by Dark Transformation, Vile Contagion, and Legion of Souls, allowing the Death Knight to detonate massive packs of mobs with synchronized timing. Defensively, Unholy is nearly unkillable with tools like Anti-Magic Shell, Icebound Fortitude, and Death Strike, providing constant self-healing and mitigation. And on the utility side, Death Grip offered great mob control, enabling tanks and healers to reposition or interrupt enemies easily. However, Unholy also carries several notable weaknesses. One of the main ones is the long setup time. So building festering wounds, applying diseases, and aligning cooldowns can make the spec feel sluggish in short-lived fights. It also lacks big utility compared to a lot of the other specs that bring group-wide buffs and external healing. And in AoE builds, their single target damage does suffer a bit, making Unholy weaker on bosses that require consistent single target output. So this means that Unholy can excel in coordinated groups or longer encounters, but it can feel clunky or underwhelming in pugs or fast-paced dungeons. Let's talk a little bit about their utility now. So Unholy brings a well-rounded suite of utility options that enhance both survivability and group control. So Death Grip is the cornerstone of Death Knight utility, allowing you to pull dangerous casters or priority targets directly into your group's kill zone. Beyond initial pulls, it can also serve as a pseudo-interrupt when used mid-cast, and then Raise Ally provides an invaluable combat resurrection, making Unholy one of the few DPS specs that can recover a key player mid-fight, especially if it's a crucial healer or tank that dies during the encounter. They also have Insidious Chill, which supports your tank by reducing enemies' auto attack speed, reducing incoming damage in sustained fights. Though not super flashy, it does contribute a meaningful mitigation in physical heavy encounters. We also have Anti-Magic Shell, which is one of the strongest personal defensives in the game, capable of negating magic-based dots and harmful debuffs when timed correctly. For group mitigation, Vestigial Shell and Anti-Magic Zone provide powerful magic shields that can trivialize heavy spell damage phases or dot-heavy mechanics. And then lastly, you have Chains of Ice and Grip of the Dead, which makes Unholy a master of slows, ensuring that kiting or controlling adds is rarely a problem. These tools, when used well, make Unholy one of the most reliable and durable melee DPS options in the game. Let's talk a little bit about the core of Unholy Death Knight now. So Unholy Death Knight gameplay revolves around maintaining a careful balance between its two primary resources, runes and runic power, while keeping your major cooldowns aligned for maximum impact. The specialization functions on a priority-based system rather than a rigid rotation, and your goal is to ensure that you never waste resources, always capitalize on sudden doom procs, and keep your diseases and cooldowns rolling. The spec's complexity comes from managing your ramp-up phases efficiently while still reacting dynamically to procs and resource fluctuations. Let's go into our single target rotation. So in single target encounters, Unholy is going to operate as a ramping damage dealer that builds up festering wounds and detonates them with Scourge Strike or Clawing Shadows for maximum effect. You begin by casting Raise Dead to summon your ghoul if it isn't already active. From here, cooldown management becomes your top priority. Abilities like Apocalypse, Unholy Assault, and Legion of Souls should be used as soon as possible, unless saving them for critical moments in the fight. Once cooldowns are handled, your base priority centers around maintaining Virulent Plague with Outbreak whenever it's about to fall off. You should also use Soul Reaper if the target will drop below 35% health within a few seconds, maximizing execute phase damage. You also want to be spending sudden doom procs immediately by casting Death Coil, as this ability scales with several of our talented passives. You also want to avoid overcapping runic power, so you want to cast Death Coil whenever you exceed 80 runic power. You also want to keep at least 2 Festering Wounds active, refreshing them with Festering Strike as needed. From here, use Clawing Shadows or Scourge Strike, if not talented, to detonate wounds efficiently, especially when Plaguebringer is not active. When all else is on cooldown, continue cycling between Festering Strike, Clawing Shadows, and Death Coil based on resource availability. And the key to effective single target play lies in weaving together cooldowns, procs, and wound management while avoiding any resource starvation or overcapping. Now, moving on to our AoE rotation. In multi-target encounters, Unholy's gameplay shifts dramatically towards maximizing burst windows under Death and Decay. You'll be combining abilities like Death and Decay, Apocalypse, Unholy Assault, and Legion of Souls for massive AoE damage. Before entering this burst phase, build Festering Wounds across multiple enemies with Festering Strike, while Death and Decay or Legion of Souls becomes active, and you want to detonate as many of those wounds as possible using Scourge Strike or Clawing Shadows. These abilities will cleave to nearby targets if you stand within your Death and Decay zone, thanks to Cleaving Strikes. During these windows, Epidemic becomes your primary runic power spender, particularly when facing 4 or more targets. If Virulent Plague is missing from any enemies, then reapply it with Outbreak. You want to use Apocalypse on any targets with the fewest Festering Wounds to trigger the maximum ghoul spawns and cleave, and then Unholy Assault can quickly refill your Festering Wounds between bursts, ensuring you can keep detonating during Death and Decay. It's normal to waste some runic power during heavy AoE phases, so don't panic if resource overflow occurs. The goal is to detonate as many wounds as possible inside of your burst window, rather than perfectly managing efficiency. When runes run low, weave in Epidemic Cast to trigger our Runic Corruption, which then accelerates rune regeneration, and this rotation creates a rhythm of build, burst, rebuild, centered entirely on setting up for massive Death and Decay windows. Let's talk about some cooldown tips and tricks. So Unholy DK's cooldown synergize heavily with each other, and understanding how to layer them is going to be critical to maximizing your output. So Apocalypse and Unholy Assault are going to be your core offensive cooldowns, and when combined with Dark Transformation and Legion of Souls, you get a pretty big power spike. The proper sequence generally involves precasting Army of the Dead several seconds before your combat begins. Then once combat starts, use Dark Transformation to empower your ghouls and trigger its Sweeping Claws, which applies Festering Wounds to all nearby targets. Summon Gargoyle actually scales with the amount of runic power you spend during its duration, so it's critical to cast multiple Death Coils while it's active if you are talenting into this. Ideally, you want 3 or more to fully leverage its damage scaling. And then keep in mind that sudden Doom procs still count as runic power spent for summoning Gargoyle's purposes. And then Dark Transformation is going to be especially potent in AoE, tripling your ghoul's damage and giving it new abilities that cleave and apply wounds, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and this is going to greatly enhance your burst potential. Also, remember that Death and Decay and Defile only allow you to cleave nearby targets if you're standing inside of them, which often confuses new players, so positioning yourself correctly within your own AoE is going to be essential to maintaining optimal cleave uptime. If you guys enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. See you guys in the next one.